Um, I'm Matt Jordan, and my pronouns are he and him, and I'm a front-end developer at Northwestern University. And I'm also joined by Adam.
Yep, it's Adam Arling, also front-end Northwestern. Go by he, him.
And Michael Klein, or MBK, was going to join us initially. However, you'll just be able to see him at a separate presentation today at 1:20 Eastern. So to get started, when our Virtual Connect came onto our radar, David, our product manager, asked us to speak about progress on our IIIF viewer Clover, which aims to handle image, sound, and video canvases. And we were thinking, well, that's a great idea. And I think folks definitely might be interested in that. However, some broader work we are currently completing in our digital collections refresh is much larger than any single viewer, which brings us to the theory. And the theory, well, it's not an ultra novel idea, but it is to simplify. And the way we'll do that is we will utilize the IIIF presentation 3.0 API to define a majority of our front end. And we'll be using 3.0 fluent web components that will leverage manifests and collections and in the end speak to a modern web and its users. While beginning our refresh of digital collections, we began mocking out a few sample 3.0 manifests that fully represented our works. They included metadata, rights, summary, and other IIIF 3.0 descriptive properties. And to do that, we needed to analyze how users currently view our works. And so this is a current representation of a work in our digital collection site, Pantaloon Classico. Everything on this work page has been built out over some time since 2018. We have sliders in here and various components all tied together, rendering out our API data. Some of these components relate directly to the work, meaning like metadata down below here, or some might be related items such as the sliders as interstitials above, but they're all rendered with intention and of some relation to the item. The only thing, however, the only thing on the page that is IIIF fluent is this viewer at the top. And here's that same work mocked as a IIIF Pres 3 manifest in Mirador. A large majority of the content for that work is now included here through a variety of IIIF properties. And someone viewing this manifest in Universal Viewer or Mirador should be able to comprehend and digest that same information on a digital collections website. So to recap, everything in this manifest can be accessed via its IIIF properties. And with that in mind, everything on our digital collection site in the various components from the header to the footer can also be a IIIF resource. And the keyword is can, but it's definitely possible. So it may go without saying, but as the modern web stands now, one IIIF viewer, or at least the idea of a viewer, cannot handle the full user experience for someone visiting our digital collection site. But what if we instead exploded the IIIF manifest and we thought about the manifest as properties that render out elements and sections of a unique page? And by doing that, the main HTML element becomes the IIIF viewer or the client. And the IIIF properties such as label, metadata, summary, thumbnail, and part of are now the HTML headings, the description lists, the sections, the paragraphs, the figures, and aside that lie within that main. Simply put, the data model is the Pres 3 spec, and these properties are rendered to the DOM as HTML5 elements. So some background here. How do we get to this point? As a standard practice, we want to wireframe our ideas. And here's a basic mock of that work completed in February. After reviewing these, we annotated them and we identified IIIF properties that might house our data. You can see here the title is a label, the description here is a summary, metadata is metadata, etc. And then we thought about the components that might render those different elements of a page. And at the top in the header here, in green, you see Clover as our manifest items viewer. for the image, sound, and video resources that might be attached to this work. In yellow, embedded throughout, is Nectar, rendering our IIIF descriptive properties as HTML5 elements such as label, rendering IIIF properties such as label, metadata, and summary as various HTML5 elements. And then finally down at the bottom, we have Bloom and red and pink in the footer. And that is our collection items viewer that would render out related works. These collections can exist as bespoke named collections in the way we tend to think about them, yet they can also be built on request as a response in a IIIF collection shape. Altogether, these three components compound, and they can create a full representation of one of our works with Nectar as the primitive library existing within all of them. Okay, so that's the how, but why? And so using our own manifests will force us to eat our own dog food, as our colleague David says. And the byproduct of that is that it'll make our manifests more robust. And if we can rely on those manifests to represent our digital collections in the way we want to present them to the world, then those manifests are ready for the world to consume them. And if we use the IIIF presentation 3.0 API as our data model, it'll provide us a ready-to-use schema, cutting down on time that we would otherwise use to define our own custom data shapes. And also finally, creating intentional front-end IIIF components will benefit others as well as us. And we're no longer building sliders and other web components that only fit our data model. Our old friend Pantaloon again. And here is a code sandbox I pieced together. And I'll share a link with you in a bit if you'd like to play with it. At the top, we import Clover, Bloom, and Nectar, the three different libraries or packages. And then if we wanted to, and then this component also here is bringing in the actual manifest ready to go. And if we want to just pass to Clover the manifest ID, it renders out the items viewer or the viewer as we tend to think about it. And in the midsection here, I can pass to this Nectar label component, the manifest label, and I'm saying to this label component, I want to render it as an H1. And if I wanted to, I could render it as an H2 or an H3. All of these Nectar components here accept HTML attributes, and you can think about them that way. They are React components, but they will render out the actual HTML5 element and nothing more. And so I'll just go ahead and unmark these, and you can sort of see this is now spilling out onto the page as these various micro components that can sort of be moved around within the content here. And at the bottom, if we wanted to build out an explore further section or a related section, we can use Bloom and we'd pass it various IIIF collections. The first one here is maybe the collection that this manifest is a part of. And then the second one could be one that's built on the fly using that sort of search response idea where it's transforming that search response into a IIIF collection. And in this case, give me things that are of subject masks. So this is Pantaloon Classico in that way. But what happened if we wanted to see it maybe a different manifest? Well, here's a video work that we have in Clover, and you can sort of see how that's rendering. It doesn't have as much metadata. But what if we were to pass it one from a different institution? Here's one from the University of Tennessee. And this manifest here has a little bit more metadata associated with it. It's 20 items long. And you can sort of see how that looks as well. And then finally, here's another one from the University of Tennessee that is a video manifest. And you can sort of see Clover here with the VT2 transcripts being output as well. And all of this is 100% IIIF. Okay, I'm gonna pass it off to Adam now.
So as Matt is yeah, kind of been showing some of these components. It's part of the front end theory, maybe not as cool as the low end theory, but it's part of the front end theory. We've just really been trying to think about like simplifying and standardizing not only UI that we're building ourselves and we're going to use ourselves, but also things that we could build hopefully with other people in the future that anyone could use. So a lot of these could be used outside of just Northwestern context. And maybe just to highlight a little bit of why we're trying to like simplify and standardize and go in this direction. So again, this is a work that's being represented on our digital collections site that was built a few years back. And from a developer's perspective, if you kind of like look under the hood and see some of the code that was constructed to render this out to the screen. So here's just one of about 10 components, clocking in like 130 lines of code there. So there's a bunch of stuff that's been built to render out, excuse me, that representation of the work. Whereas where we're going is something that looks a little bit more like what Matt was showing, where a lot of the data on the screen in a full viewer is kind of abstracted behind some of these components, just reducing the code size. I think he squeezed it down to under 40 lines for this presentation. So I think the future direction, it allows us to move beyond just writing ad hoc components, which maybe fit like a Northwestern data model, or something that just lives in one developer's brain. And it's moving us to a mental model, like thinking about where we're writing components which use common languages amongst all of us, including IIIF and HTML. So again, the goal is trying to simplify and standardize. And for us, that extends into the developer experience. And I think the question that we're trying to ask is like, what tools can we use as developers, which ultimately yield the most productive output for end users? So I'll just walk through a few technologies that we're kind of using in some of the components that Matt has been showing, and how they really improve our developer experience. And then in turn, we again, hopefully can pass that on to the users. So React and TypeScript, that's been our library, our JavaScript library of choice for about a little over 4 years. Northwestern to build UI components. And kind of one of the main benefits of using React or Vue or whatever, you manage your application state and all kinds of event handling, which is just a lot easier to handle in a framework or library as opposed to like vanilla JavaScript or say jQuery or whatnot. TypeScript is relatively new to us, which has benefits not only on the developer side, but also for consumers. So if people are pulling these components into their applications, it allows them some insight into the data model, which is, again, kind of reflected by the IIIF spec. And then finally, because we're using the React ecosystem, we're exporting in each one of these components, Bloom and Clover in particular, just like a top level component, which your application can import. So if you're using one of these, you don't have to like pull in some giant app. You can simply import a single component. Another technology that seems to be popular in modern like front end stacks is the idea of using these kind of like primitives or building blocks. We've been using a package called Radix UI. There's others like Headless and whatnot, but the general idea behind these is you import these in your front end components or applications, and they're just unstyled primitive UI components built on web standards. So for example, in this little screenshot to the left, like maybe the text input box or a button, a submit button, or a list of linked data. All these are like radix primitives that we build on top of, and we can kind of like extend either in their presentation and their styling. We can add extra event handlers to them, extra data on top and whatnot. And the advantage is starting out with these like building blocks. They're just like out of the box area compliant. You get accessibility out of the box, so you're not like recreating the wheel. It's a lot of work to make some of these like HTML elements to just have everything like accessibly compliant. So that's definitely one of the main benefits. And also the composability behind these. You can take these individual primitive components and really be creative with putting them together, building more complex pieces of UI. Another front end, I guess, kind of like tooling that we're leaning into pretty heavily is a lot of the work that's been in conversations that have been happening in the IIIF Commons neck of the woods or the world the past couple of months. Two packages in particular that we found pretty helpful. Or again, the IIIF Commons. So I guess the gist of what's been going on there is kind of consolidating like non-visual UI component like helpers. So it'd be like code to help like process, manifest, and not necessarily like the visual side of things. So an example of one of those is a package called Vault. And for example, what this does for some of our applications, so we'll pull Vault into, say, our image or our items viewer, and we throw a manifest at Vault. Say it's like a super complex, deeply nested manifest, and Vault will normalize that data and kind of like flatten it out and give back to the front end a much more reasonable data shape to work with and process and parse and whatnot in our front end. Vault also will convert presentation 2 manifest to 3. So you could throw either presentation 2 spec or 3 spec at Vault, and you get back a flattened presentation 3 structure, more or less, which again, on the front end, it just allows you to simplify your code, and it's less that you're writing, and you kind of streamline things. We're also have been making good use of some of the types for TypeScript users that Stephen Frazier over at Digerati has spent a lot of work on. So you may be asked, am I getting tricked into using JavaScript or React or whatnot? And absolutely not. But you could maybe imagine, or say you had like a Rails application, and a Rails app imported React as a dependency, and you just took a little piece of, say, like a Rails view, and you wrap that with a React render of some sort. And then you could import any of these components that Matt showcased, and you could kind of like compose your own little like viewer within a Rails application, for example, and you don't have to go full on into React world, I guess. So where can I see some of this stuff? So we've been pushing a lot of this code up to Samvera Labs. So we encourage everyone or anyone who's interested to go check out any of the packages shown today. You can kind of dig in and see what we're doing, collaborate with us. That'd be awesome. Get some documentation, see how to use it. We've also been creating like static builds of these to really let people kind of like play with this stuff and like see how it works. So you could click here and throw some of your own manifests in here and see how they render out. Also, if you want to see some of these components, how we're kind of like pulling these into production environments, we invite people to check out our NUlib, GitHub, and especially Meta and the digital collections to see how we're kind of consuming these. And then lastly, we've been pushing them up to the Samvera Labs organizations. So anyone, across the world is open to check these out and use them, whether they're inside or outside the IIIF communities. Thanks. like Matt last week got contacted by a DJ in Rio who was interested in maybe using something like Clover for DJ sets. So yeah, just thinking about like extending this for any and all use cases. And that's it. We'll throw some links, I guess, in the chat or whatnot if people are interested. And